History did not end in 1992, or 91, or 89, depending on whether you prefer the article or book version of that thesis. Indeed, no undergraduate class since the end of the Cold War has been able to pronounce the continuation of our source of study more emphatically than ours. History goes on, and we have been experiencing it. Our collegiate careers began in historic darkness. Some of us were wrested from our first year on Stanford's campus by the worst pandemic in a century. Others, like me, were denied that first year entirely. I experienced the outside world during my freshman year through a window through which I watched the city that never sleeps turn into a ghost town. When New York roared back to life, it did so along with the rest of the country, as some of America's most ugly and deeply rooted issues reared their heads again. Just afterwards, the United States broke one of its most storied traditions, 228 years of peaceful power transitions in the federal government. But history doesn't just happen at home. Our 4 years of college also saw hot war return to Europe and the dramatic and horrifying intensification of conflict in the Middle East. But these are just the broadest strokes and barely scratch the surface of the transforming world around us. As we wrote our final papers, the subjects of future ones raged on in the background. There is something to say for those term papers and what they became. The class of 2024 has completed enormous projects on topics as varied as Chilean migration in the 19th century, the role of Yugoslavia in an allegedly bipolar world, from anti-prison activism in the 1970s to female saints in 10th century Byzantine hagiography. And honors theses are not the only way we demonstrate and disseminate what we learn. As a member of Herodotus for the last 3 years, I have had the immense privilege of reading 119 Stanford history papers. The journal we published this year is a testament to both the talent and breadth of our community. The papers printed therein span more than 2,700 years and take place across 5 continents. They're similarly varied in terms of discipline, covering ancient, military, social, colonial, medieval, religious, political, and diplomatic history, and mixtures of all of them. They are all also, needless to say, excellent. The excellence of all of our work would not be possible without the outstanding community that is the Stanford History Department. My engagement with this community began before I matriculated. Elizabeth Lindquister, a student at the time, whose connection to me was as tenuous as being the friend of the daughter of the parent coordinator at my high school, took the time and care to write me a number of emails before I enrolled in classes. The longest of them was more than 3 pages long and chock full of helpful advice. Professor Winterer, whose prior connection to me did not exist, also generously helped me select my classes for my first quarters and eventually audit a class of hers that summer. While outstanding, these were only the first of a cascade of examples. At every turn here at Stanford, all those associated with the department have been supported far beyond their obligations. And I have quite the sample size. Of my 186 units here, 107 of them have been history courses, and I've never had a quarter without a 5-unit history class. Lest I inundate you all with illustrations, I can only offer the most cursory survey of those experiences. I've benefited immensely from the magnanimity of Professors Twitty, Mullaney, and Como, and I owe the most to Professors Vardy and Knapp. While I only met Professor Vardy during my junior year, I threw myself into her courses thereafter, and they went a long way to shaping my experience here. Professor Knapp has mentored me throughout my undergraduate career, from literally the first day of college to the last. He has meaningfully guided me through the 18th century and the 21st, and I could not have asked for a better teacher. We should clap. Beyond the faculty, my time at Stanford was made worthwhile by my fellow history students. I must particularly mention the 3 early Americanists, Eric, Parker, and Novia, with whom I have had a weekly dinner to discuss historiography for more than 2 years. Even though 2 of them aren't graduating this year, they are all here today. And one more person requires mention. Without Kai Dowding, everything would fall apart. It is as much her doing as ours that we're all sitting here graduating today. In addition to people, my experience with history, and I hope and imagine many of yours, has been made up of little moments and details. Trying desperately at 3 in the morning to finish Edmund Burke's speech on reconciliation with the colonies, as I even more desperately try to choke down an obscene amount of truly awful spaghetti squash because I don't want to waste any food. Looking down to read book 7 of Republic, looking up again more than 2 hours later and realizing that despite having no lapses in concentration, I've read only 7 pages. And then going up the next day to the postdoc TA in the class to tell him that book 7 was perfect. And learning that in medieval Spanish marketplaces, figs can only be sold in pairs. Now that may be the most resounding cry of our discipline. Not the figs, the details. As all of us have encountered over and over again, very specific moments are almost always very complicated. To the extent that there are general truths, realities, or trends, they are made up of particulars. As a discipline, history is uniquely equipped to access these details and the towering edifice they can become. By championing the narrow over the general, the moment over the trend, the data over the model, and the investigation over the theory, we can better see them all. Among the humanities and the social sciences, and perhaps this is not an unbiased perspective, history is the best able to reckon with and make sense of a world which is at all times and in all places almost unimaginably complex. This is, of course, not to deny the existence of general trends. We are in the midst of a particularly important one. Democracy has been declining around the world for almost 20 years. In one of my Stanford application essays, the graduates will vaguely remember writing a number of those, I mentioned 15 countries which either fell into the grips of authoritarian leaders or barely resisted such attempts in our lifetimes, and things have not improved. From the brazen attempts against Ukraine to the more insidious machinations in Hungary, the idea of popular government is under threat. The sacred fire of liberty and self-rule is far from extinguished, but it is flickering with greater oscillation than at any time since history allegedly ended, and probably much longer before that. There is no more precious value, nor is there a more essential role than to be the tender of this flame. But there may also be no role more confusing. There's no clear single action to take, and even more importantly, it is not the role of a single person. There's no way for one person to bear this weight. What then should any of us do? How can the burden be distributed? Who should uphold which parts? I don't know. What I do know is that our time as history majors at Stanford has given us important insights. The first thing we learn in any history class is that things did not have to happen the way they did. Events only get to happen once, but they could have gone another way. Another thing we learn, particularly in introductory courses, is that historians are really reticent to predict the future. These two insights are interrelated. Historians are so loath to predict the future because they've seen how poorly such predictions have gone in the past, yes, but they are also so reticent because the past has proven so essentially contingent. Those things which are most interesting to study, and those things which could not possibly have been foreseen, and they happen all the time. The Ottoman Empire was smashed in 1402 and sent into decades of disunion and civil war because of an ill-advised message which can only be described as trash talk. One of the most famous dates in human history, 1453, is unknown if something goes wrong with the delivery. If the logistics of Union soldiers voting in 1864 go wrong, we may be looking at a very worse version of the United States. And if Sam Adams got sick in January of 1788, or even if he was just a little more sad that his last son died at 37, the United States may have been little more than a memory by then. If millions of Soviet citizens did not manage to transport themselves along with more than 1,500 factories and power plants just out of German reach in 1941, there's neither Soviet Union nor Cold War in the aftermath of World War II. Now, historians don't deal with counterfactuals for a reason. We can only study what happened. This is all just to say that those things which did happen, those things which shaped the world we live in, did not need to and in some times should not have gone the way they did. And just as importantly, they depended on discrete acts, sometimes of very small groups of people. This phenomenon, the essential contingency of history, is not a thing of the past. It will remain true, and it will be true of the fate of democracy going forward. Our learning here has taught us that we can't predict the future, but it has also taught us that there will be key moments upon which things may turn. Knowing this offers us a profound advantage. It may be that someone in the audience today will be presented with such a moment, but we all know we can't predict that. What knowing this should do is keep us from giving up because we don't know exactly what to do. We can't know exactly what to do because that is not how history works. What we can do is to try and put ourselves in the right places and be prepared. Now that would be a terrific way to end the speech, and it's even the Boy Scout motto. But there's one more important detail about today as my hat falls off. It's Father's Day, and I am so immensely privileged to have 3 father figures in the audience. Jay and Elton, my godfathers, have been with me every step of the way. Although that isn't quite right because they've been with me from long before I could take any steps. From day one of my life all those years ago, they have been perfect role models and bastions of safety, comfort, and learning. I received all of these, and spades, from my dad, Robert Johnson. There's no way to do him justice here, but he has supported and loved me as much as one person can another. He has also been here throughout my college career, listening to me rehearse the arguments of papers hundreds of times, and forcing his way through all the readings that I find interesting and sent his way. I mean, he read Meaning and Understanding in the History of Ideas because I wanted him to. What more could a son ask for? So, in light of the date, congratulations to all the fathers here today. In light of our lives, congratulations to all of the mothers and other parental figures here. And finally, most of all, congratulations to the graduating class of 2024.